Greetings, listeners. On today's episode, Howard and I spoke with a very special guest. We're pulling back the curtain on how top big law partners are breaking away to build boutique powerhouses of their own. Our guest is the CEO of Kindleworth. He explains why conflicts, mega mergers, and private capital are pushing partners to launch their own firms, and what it really takes to go from idea to fully operational platform in just a few months. If you've ever thought of, I could do this a different way, this conversation is a playbook for turning that instinct into a serious business. Enjoy. Welcome, everyone, to the Future is Bright podcast. My name is Chris Batts, and joined by my co-host, Howard Rosenberg. Howard and I are at the center of law firm talent and strategic growth here in New York City. Howard is a partner and the head of talent intelligence and acquisitions at Barrett & Brunel, and I advise and facilitate corporate law firm mergers as well as law firm MSO investments. And today, we have a very exciting guest, James Hacking, CEO of Kindleworth. James, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Chris and Howard. A pleasure to be here. Looking forward to this.
Good to see you.
So, James, share with my audience what is Kindleworth and a little bit of that journey of got you to this point of launching Kindleworth.
Sure. Yes. In a nutshell, Kindleworth is quite a specialized firm. It's focused on helping, if you like, some of the world's sort of top practitioners in the legal market to set up their own law firms. We help them through the design and build of those new organizations. And then once they're up and running, we help run those firms on an ongoing basis. How we got to be Kindleworth and where that came from might be a slightly longer answer, but in essence, my background is operational. So I've worked in law firms since I left university, and I've worked through HR and business development, compliance. I had project roles. I helped open offices. I did all sorts of different things across that operational spectrum at two very fast growth firms in the UK through S.J. Berman and Olswang back in the days. And about 2009, I had this sort of feeling that I wanted to try and do my own thing and wanted to build something of myself. And with a couple of other people that I was working with at the time, we formed basically what was a sort of multidisciplinary consultancy. So what we felt was if you had projects that you needed external support from when you're in a legal law firm, so for example, a client relationship management project, or you had a pricing project, or what have you, there are always specialists in those particular topics, but these projects are often cutting across more than one of those operational disciplines. So a CRM project isn't just a BD initiative, it's a finance initiative, it's a culture initiative, it's an engagement initiative, there's all the other components to that for it to be successful. And we felt there wasn't really an organisation in the UK at the time that was answering that, or at least that we were able to find and access and get support from. So we created a business between us, and that became Kindleworth a couple of years later. So in essence, we were a bit like a consultancy organisation through those first couple of years. But what became really apparent to us, well, I suppose a few things became very apparent to us. One of them was that we are not trained management consultants, we're operators, and we love to do the job. And we found that actually a lot of the help that some of our clients were looking for was to get the job done rather than just espouse on strategy or consider what the options might be, although of course that was part of it. And in particular at the time, there'd been the arrival of one or two sort of more boutique-looking organisations in the UK, and we found that what a certain part of the marketplace needed, and these are particularly more sort of the smaller firms, was some of that consultative advice on an ongoing basis. They didn't have a full-time CFO, didn't justify a full-time CFO, and probably wouldn't be able to attract a full-time CFO because of the nature of the to-do list. But they did need that skill set occasionally, several hours of a week or at certain points in the year or during certain cycles of the business. And we realised that between us, we could fulfil some of those needs in a way that was being answered. And perhaps the most obvious evolution of that was to have met a partner who, guess what, was suffering some of the themes that I suspect we're going to cover today, which were, this was a litigator, this was an anti-bank litigator, increasingly not able to sit within the larger law firm organisations that they had been within previously because of the nature of that conflicted work. They were getting frustrated with how to price and what they were doing and what that looked like. And they had a sense that they might be able to do it another way. And that was the first firm we ever helped come into the market.
And when was that, James? When did that happen?
So that was 2012. So
2012.
in fact, the Kindleworth brand came into being in 2011, and we launched our LLP at a very similar time in 2012.
So James, why the legal industry specifically? I mean, was it like genuine, fascination, or did you see it as an industry that was like ripe for disruption and profit? Like, what was the reason for it?
I suppose that's what I knew. So for me personally, I'd only ever worked within law firms, and the idea of being able to offer some advice needed to be steeped in the fact that I had that insight in those particular organisations. The other people that came together to form Kindleworth were also likewise steeped in the legal sector. We had people who were CEOs and compliance directors and heads of sales and so on, but again, all within the legal sector. It's an interesting question for us strategically. Could we look at how our model would apply to other sectors in the marketplace? And I think it would be very interesting to explore. But candidly, there's so much opportunity for us and so much exciting work to be done, particularly today in the legal market, not just in the UK. We'll talk about the US as well. That we have enough to focus on with that than necessarily looking at other sectors for now.
Yeah. And James, going back to that first client in 2012, was it a conflict that litigator had?
They had a number of matters that were already active. That's another feature of a lot of the work
Was
that we do.
Was there a specific like trigger or reason for them to say it's ready to leave? Like, I guess one of the questions I'll ask is, what are the common reasons for why partners are coming to you and considering launching their own firm?
Yeah, so there are a few reasons, and we hear almost all of them with each of the individuals that we meet, but perhaps amplified in different ways because of the nature of what they're doing and what they're trying to achieve. In essence, yes. So signature litigation was born out of a partner's practice that was increasingly conflicted out. So new mandates would come on board that would be exciting, would be potentially lucrative, but just simply couldn't accept those because the conflict issues within the wider organisation were that they couldn't take those mandates on. I'm not sure if I recall there being a specific one, but that was certainly the theme, and that led to a conversation about whether this is the right home for myself. But there are other themes. So we think about conflicts in a very sort of legal sort of sense, but there are wider issues. There are commercial conflicts. There are commercial challenges. There are an increasing set of frustrations that we see, particularly with partners in some of the larger firms, that they are no longer core to what that firm is trying to achieve. They're slightly more peripheral. As a consequence, they're perhaps less able to get the investment into those teams, or perhaps able to price in the way that they like to price. The nature of their work commercially is perhaps beginning to look untenable within the increasing charge out rate environment that we typically see in some of the firms. And one of the great themes of our moment, of course, is sort of mega mergers, the constant and continued drive for some of the larger firms to increase their scale and also to focus in some of those organizations on particular sectors, so private equity focused or insurance focused. And if you're in some of the more service related teams there, or perhaps just specialist units, where once you were one of the crown jewels, but now you're perhaps not in that position anymore, there are more questions to ask about how you're going to work and how you're going to organise the delivery of your legal services, given the constraints that you're now finding yourself within those larger organisations.
So Chris and I have talked about on other episodes that obviously it's a white hot talent marketplace. Technology is coming into like never before. Private capital is now coming into the industry. But before all that has kind of happened fairly recently, like when did you realize Kindleworth could be kind of a serious business? Because you started this way before.
Yes, I suppose that we were very fortunate in the two launches that we had to start with. One was obviously signature litigation, which you've mentioned. The second was Three Crowns, which is a very dominant, high quality, leading international arbitration firm now. And we launched that in London, Paris, and Washington, DC. And both of those projects, but particularly Three Crowns, because of the nature of those three territories, were complicated. And we realized that what we were offering was very specific, very bespoke, super high touch. These are complicated challenges. How do you marry up different regulatory regimes with different partnership considerations and compensation, and bring life to a new organization into the marketplace, which is going to compete with some of the very largest, well-funded firms in the marketplace. And I suppose because of that, we thought very quickly, what we're really here to do are to help people in those positions. We're here to help practitioners who have very significant books of work. They're working 2,000, 3,000 chargeable hours a year. And that what they really need is a new environment within which to do that. They haven't got the time, they haven't got perhaps the inclination to work out how to do it themselves. And they don't want to run that firm on an ongoing basis. They want to get back on the tools, they want to be in front of their clients. And it was within that context that we realized we were building something that was, as you say, a serious organization.
So you mentioned kind of the super high touch kind of principle. Is that the secret sauce of Kindleworth? Because obviously there's other organizations out there doing, they're in this space, but you seem to be concentrating on that specific item in the marketplace.
Absolutely. So, yeah, it's interesting. There are a few organizations that perhaps look very similar, but there aren't that many. And I think this is part of the opportunity at the moment is there is a need for greater operational support, the running of the business for a number of practitioners today that, as I say, are not finding that the larger firms are the best homes for themselves. So I think the market opportunity is very significant. I think what we've been very clear on from the start, though, is we're not a standard outsourcer, if you like. We do obviously take care of all of the administrative functions that you would expect of any law firm to acquire, from billing to recruitment administration to payroll to the office management and so on. Of course, those get dealt with. But what we really sell is that senior support. What our clients typically need are people who have been COOs and CFOs and HRDs who can help them design the firm, shape that organization, bring in talent, help manage that talent, can think about technology, and can really get to the nub of the so what of doing something. If you're going to focus your energies on helping build an organization that's going to be a dominant international arbitration firm, if we go back to the Three Crowns example, now how do you help those practitioners be fiercely effective at what they do? And what are you going to do behind the scenes to make sure they've got that platform, that you're empowering them to be the best they can be? And that is partly in the administration, because if you don't get that right, people are going to wonder what's happening, and they need to trust and rely that things are being effectively completed and undertaken. But it's much more in that personal relationship, it's much more in that advisory space. And candidly, there are not very many organizations out there that try and offer that. There are indeed other outsourced organizations, you say, that are very keen and eager to take on the billing processes, and that's a fantastic option for a number of businesses. But for us, it's much more, as I say, advisory-led first and executions sort of behind the scenes.
James, I'd love for you to walk my audience through, high level, a typical timeline of launching a law firm. Now, you could contrast it with someone trying to do it themselves, and you could contrast it with launching with Kindleworth. And so this is two parts. The second part I would love to address is, where do most, say, founders underestimate that cost or complexity in doing this?
Sure. Okay. The first question typically is, you would start with obviously trying to understand what is it, the vision of this particular potential founder. What is it is in their mind? What are they considering doing? And we would go through a very first stage, which is what we tend to call a kind of feasibility study. It's designed to help them talk through all of those ideas, to put them on the table. We take a blank sheet of paper, which is one of the great benefits of this. You can start from scratch and rebuild something completely to your design. But let's do that thoughtfully. Let's test it and iterate it. Let's develop it. Let's say, well, what if you had more people on day one or fewer people? What if you were in multiple jurisdictions or not? What's the minimum sort of viable entry point for your business into this marketplace? What are you trying to do in terms of momentum on day one? That can take, in some cases, quite some time because a lot of those ideas need that time and people want to percolate the concepts. And on the other hand, we've met people who've got very clear ideas, and some of whom sort of just want to get their team out of the firm and start with that as a basic notion before they try and run too far down the future path. So that's anything between probably a month or 2 months of workshops and iterations between us. It results in a proper financial plan, a proper to-do list, and a sense of what your target launch date would be. And in that, we'll have then worked out that time frame. At a sort of vanilla level, if we were to describe it like that, although they're all complicated projects, the sort of minimum time frame it would take in the UK really is somewhere between 3, ideally 4 months. And the key components of that time frame would be the regulatory regime. So it's getting through the SRE application process, ensuring you've got the right insurance protocols around that. Interestingly, and you mentioned technology, with the advent of the technology today, that's actually much quicker to fire up but deciding what to utilize and how to utilize it and how to plug that together and what that means for day one, obviously, is where you need to spend some time. The components that might take those timeframes to more like 6 months or indeed beyond are often when you want to bring multiple partners together. So it could be that it's an entire team move, in which case your exit considerations, particularly under the UK LLP structures, can be very complicated indeed, and obviously have some significant impacts on exit timeframes. But if you're aggregating partners from multiple firms, again, they've all got to align the right time for them. How do they have those conversations? What are their current mandates? What's the rhythm of their workload? And our model, hopefully, if we're doing a good job, is that you could leave on the Friday and start in your new office on day one, on Monday morning, with as little interruption as possible. And one other factor, which, because you've mentioned funding, is obviously financing these new projects. And we've been behind a number of launches that have been funded over the last 6 years. Obviously, if what one's doing is sitting down and looking at this as an initiative and thinking that what we really need is some additional capital to open those doors on day one in the way we want to bring more people together. Perhaps it's also to help you elongate your working capital requirements because you're thinking of pricing differently. Those sorts of factors typically would lead you to need sort of additional external investment. That's going to add time frame in a couple of ways. One, you've got to meet the investors, have those conversations, have the negotiations, get ready to pay for the deal and pay for the deal. As we all know, those involve lawyers, which can sometimes take some time, and add that into the process. You're also going to, in the UK, go through a different regulatory series of steps, and those take longer typically than a sort of lawyer-owned new entity in the UK. Obviously, in the US, we've got different timeframes that apply as well. But I think even if someone is ready to go, you've got to look at this as a 3 to 6 month time frame.
3 to 6 months.
That's
not bad. So are you guys facilitating those investor conversations?
Yeah, absolutely. So we actually, the first funded launch we did was back in 2017, and it was a firm in Australia, which just shows how few people like us are around the world, or certainly were at the time, that we found ourselves involved with that project. And we'd met a funder in the UK. They're actually a litigation funder who already knew a particular team that wanted to spin out and set up their new organisation. And we worked with that funder and that team to devise that investment, to set up the structure appropriately to accommodate and manage that investor, and then obviously to do the thing we would normally do to get that business up and running and organised from day one. So it's not new for us, but of course the advent of PE and the seemingly endless desire for investors of different types to find legal assets and to be more involved in the legal sector means that it is a topic certainly of the day and will continue to be.
James, I'm wondering if you have any observations on operating now in the US pertaining to maybe the cultural aspect to what you're doing, because, again, I've lived and worked in London, and just the entrepreneurial spirit in the US is a little bit different than the UK. Is there any evidence that you kind of would support that in terms of what you're trying to do in the US?
I think at the moment it's relatively anecdotal. We've got clients on the east coast of the US already. Palace is a firm that we help support. They have a New York office, as many people will know. We've launched, helped launch an arbitration duo out of Decades in Paris called Wordstone, and they've just recently opened up an office in DC. And of course, Three Crowns were here. So we've had some experience of operating and running organizations in the US. And we've had some experience of talking to lateral hires on behalf of our clients that have been American lawyers and American firms, and looking at doing different things. So the anecdotal evidence, and that's all it would be, I think, is that is true, that typically there's a greater entrepreneurial spirit, if you will, in a number of the people that we've met so far, at least within the US marketplace. That's not to say that doesn't exist in the UK. Of course it does. And all of our clients would evidence that entrepreneurialism of spirit and thought. But I think the natural sort of sense of what is possible, and if you put your best foot forward, you can go and achieve things. It does feel like there is a sort of cultural benefit, if you like, within the US marketplace. I guess proof will be in the pudding as we find our feet here and we begin to try to meet new partners and find new projects as to how we can evidence that maybe more overtly.
James, I'm curious, because of all the M&A and PE activity taking place in the UK and it's coming to the US, do you have, and you don't have to name these clients, of course, but do you have clients launching firms with the intent of eventually exiting to PE?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think increasingly, even those clients that we've launched perhaps 8, 9, 10 years ago, and it may not have been their intention at the time, and indeed wouldn't necessarily be in a pathway that one would have considered quite reasonably, given how nascent some of this is. But they are now being approached by a number of the private equity houses out there. We have a client at the moment that's been working through some thoughts around that, and we've been helping them explore the benefits or otherwise of going down that particular path. And of course, in our own business, and we're in an LP, and we've taken on an investor in Burford, and we've explored the benefits of that path for us. We talked to a number of private equity houses, so we've got some good familiarity with that. And my sense of it is, at the moment, a lot of the private equity focus has been, particularly in the UK, of course, I'm talking, has really been in a part of the marketplace which is where they think they're going to be able to achieve real scale. They're typically volume delivery businesses. They typically are B2C related legal services businesses that we deal with consumers. And we haven't seen that much yet in and around, if you like, the city type law firms, the large organizations that all organize themselves around corporate clients. I think that is coming. And some of our clients, I say, are those sorts of organizations, albeit on a much smaller scale. And they are looking to be particularly interesting to private equity at the moment.
Is there one predominant kind of practice area that you think is ripe for your ideal client doing what you're doing?
History would tell us that litigators and arbitrators are particularly sort of well suited, if you will, for this piece of thinking. Often because, of course, they're either in the right home to be pro or against the particular client types, or they're finding themselves conflicted out. And arbitrators in particular, of course, I think have some very challenging issues around taking arbitrator appointments as much as being off counsel. So those areas, I think, are absolutely right. And we could talk about that for a long time. I think there will continue to be those issues. And actually, if you take international arbitration, the conversations we're having are beginning to wonder which of the international and US firms are the right homes for arbitrators today, and whether there really should be a proliferation of sort of specialist arbitration organizations out there. But I don't think it needs to be considered as litigation arbitration because it's a legal conflict and scenario. I think it's any practitioner who finds themselves in a firm where that strategic direction has evolved over time and they're not necessarily core to the strategic direction of that firm. I think it's worth asking oneself what would be the alternatives to this. And it may well be that staying where you are for all of the various good reasons why you would be a perfectly reasonable outcome. But in that exploration, one would naturally default to, well, I could go to this other law firm, this other US firm, I could go to this international firm. But again, I think in that exploration, it's worth people now holding in mind, how much different is this going to be? What are the issues that I might find there, and how am I fixing the ones I'm currently feeling? What are the pull factors as much as push factors? And when you start looking at that, if you just had a moment to say, what if I just did this on my own, or indeed considered joining an existing specialist firm? You're talking about organizations that are built and house people just like you, think like you, work like you, operate like you. And it is typically high performance, they are typically high margin. They've got the freedom to express themselves, to design their service appropriate for their clients without the need to try to sort of sit that within multiple other, frankly, quite different looking P&Ls sitting under one roof. And those are some of the really exciting drivers that I think we're beginning to see. So it could be a commercial team, Howard. It could be, we've got a client, for example, that's sector specific in a sports sector, bringing together commercial and corporate and litigation and regulatory lawyers. Most of our clients are typically single service specialists, pensions, arbitrators, we've mentioned, litigation, of course. So it could be that a single service, but I don't think it needs to be considered to be contentious or not. I think it can be a range of different areas. And what's one of the things that we're looking at helping people do now is think about whether we can provide them with a new home for their purpose.
James, so you've seen a lot of law firm launches. It's your business. You've also seen folks who didn't engage you, that did their own thing. From your experience, I'd love for you to share with my audience mistakes made. How can, maybe in a few moments, if you were to give advice and say, look, maybe people should be thinking and putting more effort into here and they didn't, they rushed it, or it's a timing, or what are some of the best practices that now you've been through the gauntlet of doing several of these, that you realize that it's common for law firms to do this, but it would be better if they didn't? What are some of those mistakes maybe?
Yeah, good question. There's a few components that come to mind. And from a simple business point of view, the number one sort of challenge is that financial consideration on day one. You need to be very thoughtful about the speed at which it's going to take the organization to be up and running, if you like, and to be operating at, if you like, a sort of full speed. Is there going to be a challenge in clients and matters porting, for example? If they're all coming across on day one, that's a different operational challenge to be prepared to bring that work on board. But you get the benefit of recording your time or issuing your bills pretty much at the end of month one, and hopefully organizing your collections effectively so that your cash requirements and your working capital requirements are being minimized. The model that we typically build out assumes some pretty conservative views of that in order to make sure that people have got the right level of investment if indeed they've needed to find it, or have put the right level of capital in themselves if that's the source of this working capital solution. And of course, what we don't want is for that to be running out within 3 or 4 months because we've underestimated something. So I think the first thing is to be really honest and candid with yourself as to the portability of the work. Give due respect, of course, to your obligations to your existing firm and what the implications of those obligations are going to be in that transitional period as to what could come across. That would be the first thing I would say. And interestingly, a lot of people are very conservative about that, and I think that is right. That is the better way around than don't worry, everything's going to follow, and then on day one, you're struggling to get that first mandate up and running. I think the second thing I would say is this isn't something to do on your own. And lots of people do, and that's because they actually want to take those tasks on, they want to go through that journey. Fantastic. And at a personal level, I think there's some fantastic experiences to be had in building one's organization and taking everything on oneself. But the reality is, lawyers not been in charge of organising insurance or regulatory applications or dealing with employment contracts, perhaps the less of employment lawyers, or building brands from scratch. And the thing I think that's most important and really critical for our client base is get the expertise around you, build the team around you that is going to help you be successful. Be clear what you want to achieve on day one so that you have a laser focused on what matters to get you going from day one. And then the last thing I'd probably say is you're going to go on this is a journey. This is step one. Day one is simply the first step of complexity to begin that. You don't have to be everything to everybody. You don't have to have designed and delivered everything on day one. What matters is that you've got to the place where you can start to operate effectively. Allow other topics, allow the firm to breathe and to grow over the course of year one, year two, year three, year four. So for example, partner compensation, what one might devise on day one with the initial group of founders might need to evolve over the course of years 2, 3, 4, and 5 as other laterals come on board and someone like Howard's helping bring those people together. You need to give due care to allowing appropriate evolution of what you had on day one to reflect that changing nature of the business. These are fast growth organizations in our experiences. And that's going to mean you're going to need to be a bit of nimble in your thinking and allow that evolution to be properly considered as you go through that process.
So on the fast growth issue and talking about you're on a journey with your clients, and as you continue to kind of work with more firms, across more jurisdictions, James, I was just wondering, what are those likely services in the future? Have you given any thought to what those future services might be on an ongoing basis as your clients grow and then Kindleworth grows in parallel, what those services might be for tomorrow?
In terms of services we might provide to clients as they grow? Yeah. We're trying to be and provide a kind of one-stop shop. The rationale for our engagement with our clients is we are your operator, we are your business partner. And so you shouldn't need to look beyond us for any of the topics that might be on your list, however nuanced they are or whatever they might look like as a firm evolves. We ought to be capable of helping you consider those in the right time and going out into the marketplace to find expertise if it doesn't already sit within an organization. But there are two particular areas that we give thought to today, and one of those is around the branding and the PR support that our clients have. We favor going to specialists in those areas to get that specialist skill set, and that's the model that we continue to utilize. But as we develop scale, we find we work with a smaller and smaller number of those organizations. There may be a way of organizing that to help make that feel like it's still part of the sort of one-stop shop rather than a more independent offering. So to be debated. It would be interesting to see whether we, in the end, do go that far in relation to marketing and business development and branding. Another area for us is going to be in technology, and particularly in and around AI. We're beginning to now bring on board our own legal engineers, and we have our own IT service, of course, so our clients sit in, and we build IT environments for them and manage them and support those for them. So we can't really do our job well if we're not also advising them and helping them consider the merits or otherwise of different AI applications that are available in the marketplace, and what to use when and how and with what benefit. So that is an expansive area for us, there's no doubt. And actually working with people like you, Howard, how do we help our clients find the talent of the future? How do they go on that growth journey? How do they engage other natural partners in particular, but talent from within the associate ranks as well? And how do we help them get the attention from the experts in the marketplace, such as yourselves, where they can find that talent and bring them into their new organizations? And some of those are the relationships we foster, very keenly, and will continue to do so. But I could see all of those as growth areas, particularly as our clients continue to grow, the demand in those areas increases.
And I have just one last question, Chris, for James. This is like more of a crystal ball question. So again, we're kind of living in a unique moment in time, as we talked about, in terms of the forces that are acting on the industry. Just would love to get your perspective about, how you're positioning Kindleworth going forward, and are you optimistic, given your position in the marketplace, about taking that journey going forward?
Always optimistic, Howard, absolutely, yes. But yes, this is an incredibly exciting time for us. I think you talked about a moment in time. We've been talking about the concept of planets aligning. I think when we were first in the marketplace, we started to offer a path to reducing one of the barriers that might sit in one's way. If one had the idea of doing one's own firm, often you start with, well, how am I going to do that? I haven't got the time, I don't know how to do it, I've got to deal with the SRA in the UK, I've got to deal with insurance, I've got to deal with it. The reality is we have removed that barrier by offering the group of services that we offer to our clients. So that's perhaps one of the planets now sort of lining into position. I think funding is another major part of that, and the fact that we were able to start to find solutions for that back in 2017 and have been accessing different sources of capital since then has become another significant barrier that we've been able to start to reduce, or indeed remove. I think another component is technology, and I think the advent of technology, I think its disruptive nature, I think the opportunity of accessing that, of using it in a way to enable you to reconsider your legal services and where they're deployed and how you organise yourselves, and how to really maximise profitability as much as just offering some sort of difference in your charge out rates or the way you're organising yourself. I think that is another major feature, and technology today is far more accessible and easy to adapt and to put into place than it's ever been. And then I think there's the state of the marketplace, and we've talked about mega mergers, but I think we're beginning to see a proliferation of teams that are beginning to question whether they're in the right homes at the moment, of individuals, of course, if not the team that are having that thought. And we've got two very significant US-UK mergers in the build at the moment. It'll be fascinating to see what that means for partners in those organisations and who might consider an alternative, which might be to set up their own firm. So I think the nature of the growth within the existing law firms, I think technology, I think the liquidity of technology, I think the availability of capital and the fact that we exist does create a moment in time. And therefore, my excitement and our excitement about what we're trying to do. And just to sort of maybe finish that, one of the things we've been conscious of in the past is we've been very quiet as an organisation. We've typically not put a head above the parapet. We are rightly quiet and behind our clients and just getting on with the job that we need to do. But we realised that there are more and more people that would like to know we exist. And I think that's what we're trying to do now. It's trying to say to the market, look, we are here. That doesn't mean this is the answer for you. It doesn't mean that this is the path you might want to go down, but you might want to explore it and you might want to understand it. And having the chance to sit in front of people and to do that is a great privilege, as is the privilege of helping them then to proceed if they so wished and to design and build new organisations and see the market react to those new entrants.
James, you alluded to, and I'd love for you to share a little bit more. Kindleworth is in the US, but coming to the US, if I understand. Can you share a little bit about timing, your thoughts, what you guys were wanting to do?
Yeah, absolutely. So on the one hand, it's no more complicated than we have businesses we support here, and we want to build out teams that can help deal with the time zone differences and to be present more physically. So I think we will start to see us recruiting in, for example, into our compliance and our IT teams as much as into HR and finance in due course to support our existing mandates. But I think beyond that, and perhaps where some of the excitement is, it does feel like, within markets along the East Coast and across the US, there's a lot of opportunity out there to have these conversations and to build new law firms. The chicken and egg of who are we hiring and when do they arrive and how does that dovetail with finding the projects is something, of course, that we're looking at right now. We're very keen to meet talented people who've got senior operation experience, whether that be the COO, CFO, HRD, whether it's been it could be people who've got an innovation background, who have been on change management initiatives or open new offices. So these kind of operators in some of the larger firms and some of the parts of the marketplace are the people that we're beginning to talk to and beginning to meet. And hopefully we can offer them something really quite different in the way they operate, to utilize their skill sets and their experiences, but to go on a client-facing role and to be part of delivering services of our own into those environments. In terms of timeframes, we have in our own mind that in April we want to be ready to help people work and to organize themselves, and we're excited to be working to that end.
Excellent, very good. James, what's the most important question that I did not ask you in regards to the partners in big law that normally would have this great idea of bringing their practice and launching their own law firm, who are listening today? What should they be thinking about? What's that most important question?
I think it is to have a sort of a chance for a sort of a candid assessment of where one is in one's career today, to look at these macro drivers, to look at the environment that they're sitting within, and have a good conversation with oneself or indeed with another as to where their careers are at that point. And as I say, for the majority of practitioners, they are in the right homes. They are in phenomenal organizations. Big Law has got some extraordinary enterprises and provide some extraordinary services. So I'm not suggesting for a second that everybody would naturally want to set up their own organization. But I think if you do have in your mind, I wish I could do it this way. If you have that sort of thought of there's another way to do this, then I think the reality is, and what we experience, is that there are very few existing law firms where you can truly answer those questions and actually get on then with putting those changes in place, or indeed anything like a time frame that means you haven't gone off the idea before you've managed to actually implement it. And I think it's that essence. If you have that in one's mind, if you feel like you've got a vision for something, or a desire, or an ambition for something, don't bottle it up. Explore it. You may rule it out for lots of very well-informed reasons, but be informed and have those conversations. Find your way to discuss that with someone like us, or perhaps one of you both, or someone else in the marketplace, in a very sensitive and obviously confidential way. Just have the chance to give yourself the space and the room to really consider that properly.
Yeah, excellent. James, finish the sentence for me, please. The future is bright because?
The future is bright because the planets are aligning, and Kindleworth is here to help you realize that vision.
Excellent. James, how people can find you, contact you, follow you on social media?
Of course, yes, on LinkedIn, should be easily found there, and obviously our website, kindleworth.com, if they so prefer.
Excellent. James, it's been an honor, a pleasure. Thank you for your time today.
Really enjoyed it. Thanks, James.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.